like to start by giving a warm welcome to Sebastian Rödl and Martin Hägglund for taking part in this conversation today. Sebastian Rödl is a professor of practical philosophy at the University of Leipzig, and as you know, Martin Hägglund is a Swedish philosopher, currently the professor of humanities at Yale University. The topic of this conversation is, of course, education. And here at school, we often talk about lifelong learning. And perhaps that actually starts with Rödl's last sentence of his paper. Education is the child's growth into itself. I now hand over to Niklas, who will lead the conversation. Welcome.
Okay. Very welcome. And I can say a few words about practical stuff. The exit is this way instead of if the heating gets too warm. It's an honor and a privilege for us today to have Martin Hägglund and Sebastian Rödl here. And we've been meeting some students. You're also students, but we have a meeting in a more informal setting in a classroom where the temperature got really warm. But the conversation that is taking place here is about the relationship between living a life in what it means, and what we mean by living a life, we also mean learning within this life. So the question is, how should you understand yourself as a living creature and as a learning being? My way of leading the conversation is to hand over the conversation. And this, I think, is one of the most elementary things in education that you have to know when you're handing over something to a person who wants it and who is fit to take responsibility for what to do. And that's a daring task for the teacher and for the moderator or for a human being in relation to others. So this is the challenge, and I think that the conversation will start. Martin will say a few words, and then we're on our way.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're delighted to be here. And I'm very moved and inspired to be back at Anna Whitlock. I was here in 2019 and 2020. But even the greatness of that experience could not have prepared me for how amazing it was to step into the classroom today with Sebastian and see the students had, as Niklas likes to say, materialized their reading and their thinking by writing on these rolled out papers on the floor, questions, quotations relating to our texts, and they immediately swarmed us and engaged in conversation. And I was feeling rather tired and withering this morning, actually, but I, like a flower that is being watered and receives sunlight, I perked up immediately, so I'm still high on that. And it also made me remember that Hegel, the philosopher who's arguably the most important, both for Sebastian and for myself, and also for Niklas's teaching here, Hegel was actually the headmaster and teacher at the Gymnasium in Nuremberg between 1808 and 1816. And from what I understand from biographies, Hegel, like Niklas, got very involved in thinking about the curriculum, thinking about how to think about textbooks. And I find this biographical detail very moving because Hegel's philosophy as a whole is concerned with what he calls Bildung, with education, on all levels of living, actually. And I thought it would be a good place to begin that, like Hegel, Sebastian also found himself a number of years ago having to think not just philosophically, but concretely in practice about didactics, because you've actually been involved in teaching teachers in Germany. So you're somewhat familiar with coming to a setting like this and talking to teachers and students. So maybe we could start there and take it from there.
Yeah. I want to express my gratitude for this event. I'm really moved, need to recover myself from, this is enormous, this is great. We have in Germany, in the department where I teach, two forms of curriculum. The one prepares you to be a teacher of philosophy and ethics at the Gymnasium, and the other leads to a BA and MA degree in philosophy. And as part of this teacher's curriculum, there is a section which the other students do not need to take, the BA, MA students, which is called Fachdidaktik, didactics of the specific subject. It's a general requirement no matter what subject you intend to teach in school later, biology, mathematics, or whatever, they all have their section of Fachdidaktik. In the other subjects, very often I find, it's my experience, that there is a certain disconnect between that area, Fachdidaktik, and the, as well, research proper. It's not necessarily the case that the people who teach Fachdidaktik biology are like spearheading biological research. There's a certain distinction here, a certain separation. I've always found that in philosophy there couldn't be. It was partly accidental, but I came to be responsible for that part of the curriculum. So that required me to think about the kind of task that was not exactly the same, but also not fully different from the task I face myself every day, the task of teaching philosophy in Gymnasium. On the one hand, I gave a lecture, meaning to introduce students to ideas through which they could comprehend their task. My main aim was to give those students means to think about the particular office they had taken on, or the particular challenge, which in a way is a sort of even like concentrated or intensified form of the question that guides my essay, Autonomy and Education, because nowhere else in philosophy is it more acute that what is necessary in order for there to be teaching of philosophy is that the students do philosophy. Yeah, so a certain understanding of what the office of the teacher is, namely to present students with something that they then take in and then give back. I always have this joke that this is the form of pedagogy there. The same material appears thrice, namely once on the blackboard, then in the sheets of the students, they sort of copy it, and then a third time in the test. You know, it's the same material 3 times over. So this is something I learned sometimes. So the rhythm, this is obviously pointless in philosophy. Yeah, that form of comprehension of what you do. It's not that there is nothing to learn, on the contrary, but it's obvious that the learning can only reside in the students becoming, as we're intellectually self-moving. So the difficulty of comprehending how the teacher can give in such a way that the reception is the activity of the one who receives. Yeah, that in a certain way can appear to be a paradox. Yeah, receiving seems in a certain way the opposite of acting. Yeah? It seems a passion, not an action. Yeah? But there must be, if there is to be teaching of philosophy, there must be a form of receiving, which is the activity of the student. So that was my aim in this lecture, to provide means to reflect on this, not necessarily to, as were, give those students something that they could rehearse to themselves, but something by which they could approach intellectually the real situation they have in the school. I also attended lessons that they would give. So as part of their curriculum, they would teach a certain number of lessons, and I would be present and discuss it with the teacher and with the student. It was very to me, it gave a sense of reality to what I'm doing when I saw how concretely relevant it is to what you do in the moment in the classroom, how uniquely relevant it is to that, how you comprehend the activity in the first place. That is not abstract at all.
Exactly, and here I think there's a very useful distinction that figures in various ways in your essay, and that is important to both of us. And it's a distinction between thinking of like producing a result or actualizing a capacity. So the way we talk about education often now is in terms of like producing results, producing outcomes. And that idea of pedagogy inviting precisely this model of where the teaching is a sort of transportation or is a means to an external end, the result. And thereby the student then also figured as this raw material to be molded so as to produce a result, rather than thinking of the student as already a active living person with capacities that needs to be helped in their actualization or refinement. So I wonder how concretely that played out, because I would imagine like these days, all of these teaching curriculums, I'm sure in Germany as in Sweden and the US, are very suffused with this production language rather than this actualization and capacity language.
Yeah. It's often that the Lehrpläne is the document produced by the government that lays it down what must have been learned 8th grade, 9th grade, and so on. And I partly try to teach the future teachers how to deal with that. But I wanted to add something to this. I mean, this idea of production that you described as production of a result of inherent in it is a certain manner of approaching the student and a certain manner of comporting oneself or understanding oneself in that relation. Namely, just very bluntly put, the student is matter which is to be given a certain form. The most elementary and Aristotelian example for this is there's a piece of wood or stone and you carve out a statue. It's matter and form. Yeah, and important thing is that the matter, of course, must be taken account of. So the woodworker must know as well how to apply the chisel and so on. But the wood itself is in no way active in the determination of the form of the sculpture. The wood is just there as a mere, as it were, possibility for receiving that form, but the source of the form resides in the sculptor alone. Now, if you have that form of understanding of what your office is as a teacher, the sculpture now would be someone who can, for example, solve these form of exercises in mathematics in such a way as to get 9 out of 10 right. that could be a description of the benchmark that you got to meet, and then you've done your job well. If that's the result. What's completely annihilated in this conception is a human relation, a relation of one human individual to another. And what's therefore also completely annihilated is the teacher's own, as we're putting herself forward as the individual she is. It's sort of a form of hiding of the teacher behind the result. You can say that the sculptor is a great sculptor, but what do you know of him as a human being from the sculpture? Can hide behind it. And that is actually what that form of pedagogy enables the teacher to do, to rescind from the exposition, from the being herself, as we're called forth, as with the totality of her being, I want to say, in this relationship.
Yeah. No, and what's helpful with that contrast too is that it brings out that, unlike with the stone or the wood that is to be formed, which is completely passive in relation to that process. If you don't do anything to shape it, it will not do anything to become a house or an axe or whatever it is. Whereas a key element of pedagogy is recognizing that the student in question, all of you, are already engaged in the activity of learning constitutively. It's already at work, and there's already a need, an organic need, to be educated, and part of it is about enabling the actualization of that capacity, and that creates a very different relation, because that means instead of a one-way direction of imposing form on matter, we're already engaged in a shared activity, which is the activity of learning, and for that to take place in an enabling rather than disabling way requires the teacher not only to acknowledge that activity of the student, but to put him or herself at stake in the practice and show that this is, even the act of teaching is not a transportation of pre-given. This is something that I am in teaching have to determine again, and thereby have to risk coming to realize that I don't fully understand it. And I often find, very concretely, many of the most powerful pedagogical moments in the classroom for me happens when I might go in and I know my take on this thing, and I come to a point where there's a breakdown in my own understanding, and at that point you have a choice as a teacher, however tacitly and subtly, to either paper that over, disown it, not acknowledge it, and that can be very tempting because that's a way of preserving your own authority. I know this shit. I have complete command. But what happens when you, at that moment, choose to acknowledge rather than disavow, own up to rather than disown your own lack of comprehension, is that something happens that doesn't just happen in me or in you, but in the classroom. Because now, by owning up to that and making that visible, that process of genuinely trying to understand and get a grip on something that has its own authority, and that we're both beholden to as teachers and students, all of a sudden you open up a totally different spiritual space, we could say, because the students can also see that the teacher is still learning, and we're engaged in trying to get a grip on this issue that matters for its own sake, and for which we are both responsible as teachers and students. And that's, I find, one of the most important things to teach, that as a teacher, I'm not in possession of this property of knowledge. I am trying to cultivate a relation to things that matter and that make a claim on me, and that I can get wrong or right, and that you also have the authority to call me out when I get it wrong.
Yeah, it's just I think I'm going to tell an anecdote just in a second, but this is not sentimental when I say this now, so please do not feel sentimental in any way when I say this now, but there are two forms of love which are absolutely internally crucial, the medium in which any form of teaching can occur. And this is love of what you teach. You must yourself think or exhibit, the specific joy of comprehension that is afforded by the object, by the content, by that which is the theme of your teaching. If you cannot, as well, give, manifest, make visible that form of joy, you will never get anyone to be motivated to think himself or herself into that. You may motivate the people to, reproduce certain things that you put on the blackboard, and but you will not motivate anyone to enter into intellectually that form of comprehension. And that's something which requires, again, the teacher as an individual, because this is something that you are. This is not something that is either for you. There's not an external qualification. This is something that you must show in the way in which you are in the manner in which you relate yourself to this. And the second is love of the ones whom you teach. You must really care for these people, because this is what you described just now. These moments of seeing, and I know this too. You try to explain something and you seek words. Of course, you have them at their disposal because you don't do it for the first time, but still you speak them, and then there's someone else, and this presence of the other human being whom you seek to address with your presentation may have the effect that you realize, oh my God, I'm speaking these empty words. Do you really know what I say? And because you sort of now relate to what you say through the understanding of the other. And this has the other side, that you must be prepared, or must be open, or must even in a way desire that from what you say something sort of comes forth from the student that is completely unpredictable for you. This is like a structural surprise. That's part of the form of the situation. And now that is something that you can only bear, I think, if you love the other. Otherwise you just feel scared. As you say, but this nexus of love and trust, mutual trust, is actually, I think, necessary the other way too. There needs to be trust on the part of the student of the teacher. Trust, that the teacher is sort of this is something that cannot be knowledge. So it's like a form of secular faith, although it doesn't relate to a commitment now, but to a person actually in a way. Anyway, so sorry, but I wanted to, No, I wanted to tell this anecdote, but
tell the anecdote and allow do my conceptual distinctions.
Sure.
Tell the anecdote. Great, excellent. So, I think a very helpful distinction to get this phenomenon into view is a distinction that Heidegger makes in Being and Time, and that is very important to my current work, and I know it's very important to Niklas' teaching here at Anna Whitlock as well, because Heidegger makes this distinction between speaking and talking, which is, I find, and what he means is that there is a constitutive phenomenon of, let's call it speaking. Now, before the distinction, that we talk, or speak, we can use either word. We engage in discourse all the time to make sense of things, to make sense of ourselves, to make sense of the world. But within that phenomenon, there is a normative distinction between someone speaking and someone just talking. And colloquially, we have a good word for just talking, and that's bullshit. You know, when someone is just bullshitting, you're talking without really knowing what you're talking about, really having a grip on it. And a distinction like this, I take it, is parts of what is at stake, whatever we're speaking about, whether it's in the classroom, among friends, among partners, among family, that modal distinction between authentically speaking and just idly talking is always at work, and you can almost hear the difference. And in the classroom, this is exactly related to the phenomenon I was talking about. You know, like, yeah, I thought I was truly speaking about the topic, which is say that I was in living connection to the matter at hand, and I was able to see the inferences and links, and I've been able to make sense and open up this topic to my students rather than close it down. And then the dreaded sense that, like, my speech is falling into idle talk. I no longer really have a grip on it. And I can only realize that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that my speech is not proper speech because it's addressed to others, to whom I recognize that I'm beholden and who are holding me to my word, as it were. So that's why I actually can't know what I know and to what extent I know what I'm talking about until I'm actually doing it. It's not something you can find out from the inside. And that's also why it's not something, a knowledge you possess once and for all. It only exists in and through the activity. And I think part of what we want to cultivate, both specifically pedagogically in the classroom, but then this has a virtue that extends into all other contexts, is a sensitivity to this distinction between speaking and talking, such that you will actually be more able to hold yourself and others to speech rather than mere talk. So I think that's a sort of another helpful distinction.
Heidegger's term, as you know, I'm just going for talk, is Gerede, and that's actually derived from a perfect participle, geredet. This is to say, what it means is that what is always said, what's always talked. You know, so it's like that what people say. You know, it's being said, and this is kind of. I try actually to cultivate this also with a student, to have a kind of inner hindrance to just repeating things being said. In a way, it's not avoidable, you know, because that's also part of how you learn. You know, there's certain, as people say, certain discourse, you know, and certain things are said there, certain formulae are being used, and it's part of learning also, you know, to get inside when such a discourse. It's especially endemic in our milieu in academia, you know, it's horrible. Gerede, you are not there yet, but you'll find out. So Gerede, so you repeat, and it sounds good, you know, and it sounds very intelligent. This Gerede can be very sophisticated too, you know, it needn't be like anything, you know, superficial or vulgar. And it can be like, you know, people speak of jargon, and too, you know, certain ways of speaking, and to develop a kind of inner hindrance to just going in for that. But it's just saying, yeah, okay, well, I hear this, I've heard it a lot, you know. But, you know, do I want to say that? You know, and I think it's a real joy to be in a form of conversation where you have the freedom to do that, to as well cultivate that form of slowness. I think there's this relates specifically to philosophy, but I think it's a general intellectual virtue. It's a line in Wittgenstein's. You know Wittgenstein? Wittgenstein? Who's heard of Wittgenstein? Hands up. Great. Wittgenstein, superb, super. Anyway, so he has this line. He says, in philosophy, the one wins the race who comes in last. Yeah? The one wins the race who comes in last. Not the one who's there first, but the one who's last. The one. And also, further line, same theme. The greeting among philosophers, they needn't say "Grüß Gott." What they say is, "Take your time." There's no they greet each other. No? Take your time. Slow down. Slow down. So anything in your thinking that slows you down and is related to this distinction, because Gerede is always fast. Gerede is always fast. It's always already said. That's why I said it's a perfect participle. It's always already said. It has been said already. You don't even need to say it. It has. Yeah. So, but when you want to acquire a sense of meaning what you say, being able to mean what you say, you mean what you say, not that it's been said, but you say it, then you need time.
Yeah, and that's all very helpful. I think an important thing to underline, though, is that to be able to speak, you don't yet have to have mastery of the subject. So it would be the wrong lesson to think, okay, now I'm not going to talk until I really know what I'm talking about. Sort of a very good example of speaking rather than talking is, for example, when you just like ask a question like, I actually didn't understand that distinction. Can you explain it more? Then you're actually speaking in the situation. Indeed. Because your speech is adequate to the situation. This is so important in the classroom that it's much less speaking, much more talking to just repeat something that you've learned but haven't internalized. And it can be that moment when you're actually owning up to your lack of comprehension and just with disarming simplicity. Speaking to the fact that this is unclear to me, and that difference you can do here. You can just hear that question sounds different because it's speech rather than talk. And I know this is something that Niklas also emphasized a lot in his teaching, to just actually learn to ask those kinds of questions, because that's actually when the question, the text or the topic or the issue is opened up as a genuine object of understanding, something that needs to be understood, that is not already understood, and thereby sets us a task. And the first, and the first task is sort of to open that up rather than close it down.
No, it's. So perhaps this is now the place to get in my anecdote, but it's one that I actually mention in the preface to my. A book, Good and Evil. It's you haven't read it yet because it's only in German as of now. It will be out in English in a while. But so I attended these lessons, philosophy lessons in school, and this was in 9th grade of Oberschule. Now we have a differentiated school system, so Oberschule is the less academic, ambitious line of school education, different from Gymnasium. So you would think, there's less intellectual capacity there. That would be your presumption. That's what I'm just mentioning. 9th grade, Oberschule, and the teacher discussed the command to love your enemies. And in order to get the students to think about this, she asked them, and I think there was some kind of group work, which was then, as were collected together and brought on the blackboard. You probably know these techniques. And the task, she said, was to think about advantages and disadvantages of loving your enemies. What's good about it, what's bad about it, why you should do it, perhaps why you shouldn't, so on. No? And as it happened, there were a lot of advantages to loving your enemies. A lot of advantages to loving your enemies. There, for example, that the enemies might let off with their hatred if you love them. So or that the hatred bears yourself down somehow. This is really ugly. You feel bad. When you're just full of hatred. So love your enemies, you feel better. It's on the backboard, And then this perhaps now really too cliche, but it's true that the boy was called Elias. Anyway, so he stood up and he said, or he raised his arm and he said, now what's there on the blackboard under advantages? That's all selfish. Love of enemies is not even there. It's not even, it doesn't appear on the blackboard. All selfish. And the teacher went on on our course, undisturbed, said, yeah, sure, yeah, of course it's, but these are all connected, love of yourself and love of the other and love of, it's just all like, all love, so it's, of course, it's all. The fact was that this boy had taken down the entire scheme of thinking about this in one question. It had fallen apart. Like the teacher would have had to respond, holy shit. Yeah. Okay, now what do we do now? What do we do now? What is this? What kind of a requirement is that? Where the question, what is in for it for me, is out. Where this question is sort of dismissed and a different principle is put forth, love your enemies and not know what's in it for me. What's my advantage here? Oh yeah, that's good for me. Now where this is out, what kind of a thought is that? Do we comprehend that thought at all? Does it make any sense? Is it possible to be practically motivated, moved by such an idea? So that would have been a response, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen, and the boy was sort of pasted over, and he probably thinks, he said something stupid or something, irrelevant or something. But even though this was the moment of philosophy in this classroom, in this lesson, this was the moment of philosophy. Yeah, but this moment was killed. Yeah, so that's why this is the office of the teacher. The teacher doesn't have the office, of telling students what to think, but she does have the office to, as well, recognize, to register, to apprehend when something is happening, when thought is happening, in the student. Yeah, this is the main task, and that's a task that's not something. Again, that's something where the individual is at stake.
Yeah,
yeah, where you put yourself forward, and cannot hide behind any form of competence or qualification or whatever. Whether you do that or not, that's something where sort of your being as such is put forward.
Great, and I think what's important about a moment like that is that it's not only an example of the holy shit response would have been speaking in that situation. And by doing that, it's not only then that you open on to that specific philosophical question, but you also model in a sort of exemplary way then that it can be a virtue to express and take responsibility for your confoundment or your perplexity.
Yes.
And that itself is a philosophical virtue.
Yes.
Whereas when that is shut down instead, it's not only that a question is lost, but also the opportunity to set that kind of
I
example.
like this example specifically, as I was trying to bring out, because there's also, this requirement itself is deeply confounding, and it's quite correct to be confounded by it. I mean, and to not know what to say. But that is something, an experience, that you yourself as a teacher, can, as it were, put on display and say that's, as you say, that's the response. It's obviously a thought that we understand, but at the same time, it's so radical, so strange in a way, to all that, calculating approach, this, do I do this, do I that, what's better, what's worse, what are the advantages, what pro and con, weigh them up, and all of a sudden this is pushed aside and you don't know, where am I now? What am I doing? Thinking about what to do, if that's not the form in which I'm now, which I now think. So it's quite proper to be confounded, and this is, to me, I think even would be, it's my idea. I mean, I'm not in to tell other people what to do, but I think this is not confined to philosophy, but somehow an experience of of being really, as it were, called or demanded by the question or the thought at hand. You know, that there's really something that sort of demands something of me. You know, there's this thought in it, love your enemies, and now I must respond, and I don't know how. But this doesn't mean that I can let it go. You know? And this is an experience which I think is the kind of birth, you know, of thought as such. You know, and if you sort of exclude that kind of thing, you know, from your very idea of teaching, then you have effectively excluded, you know, that there be in the classroom, that there be thought. I mean, of course, this is also not something you can, as a worker. I mean, you can foster conditions under which it may happen, but it's also not something that you can, as it were, produce.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the presence, on the intellectual presence, on the spiritual presence of the students. Right?
That spirit, maybe we should allow ourselves to be interpolated. I don't know, what Niklas, what the format, wherever he is. Yeah. Do we? Well, yeah. I think just us to actually enact some of the virtues we're proclaiming.
Well, how's that going to be? Huh? I'm going to lecture you down
on why you shouldn't do that. Yeah.
I can speak for 90 minutes without pause, I can tell you. Even without manuscript.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We can open up for some interpretation. You can try to rephrase or have a question for Martin and Sebastian about what's being said, your own thoughts, everything.
And also about the reading. I mean,
yeah, the reading.
We already had very rich conversations in this spirit in the classroom, but
so
if people wanted to open up,
yeah,
let's go. Yeah.
Talked about just shortly, so I can actually. Is this on?
Yeah, it is on. Yeah.
I'd love if you just repeated what you've just said, because I'm very tired. It would be nice, so you can actually form a question, because first you need to metabolize.
I say. Yeah. No, this is true. As I said, be slow. Yeah, it's a virtue. Yeah. No. So I mean, we said various things, but perhaps repeating one thing.
I'll interpret what you
Please.
just said. Yes,
please.
Sebastian Rödl. No, so I think the most general lesson of this example is something like this: that when you, from a position of supposed authority, the teaching authority, when you actually make it part of teaching to also confess and recognize your own perplexity before certain questions, or your own rethinking of an issue, what you are doing then is not just opening up that specific conversation, you're modeling a kind of virtue that is relevant not just for philosophy or the classroom, but for life in general, which is specifically the practical ability, the practical wisdom to actually be sensitive to those moments where there is something in your own self-understanding or your own understanding of the issue at hand, whether that's an argument with a friend or in a family or in the class, that where there's a choice point where you have all sorts of resources to shut that down and talk over it, paper over it, often with great eloquence and authority, or the opportunity to actually speak. And when you're actually speaking, you transform the situation not just for yourself, but for the other, because you're letting yourself be seen in that way, and disclosing the situation as a shared one, where understanding is something that has to be worked out in continual activity. And what I think this is so important is that it is a kind of practical ability that is so important in sort of every register of life. So that's why, like, part of what you're learning when you're learning philosophy, learning in school, ideally, is also learning how to continually learn. To not learn a formula for how to live, but to develop the sort of capacities and abilities that will enable you to virtuously respond to difficult particular situations with good judgment, as it were.
Okay, this amazing summary. I now wonder, how do you cultivate the ability to be able to show this weakness where I don't know this
Yeah.
as a teacher, because I know I have teachers where they can say, "Oh my God, I don't know. I actually don't know. Do you guys have any answer?" But I wonder, I personally think to be able to do that, you need to be safe in yourself and safe
Sure.
in your role as a teacher. You need to feel like you can remain authoritative, or have that safety that the class can trust you and your ability
Absolutely.
to teach them even if you don't know something. And I wonder, how do you
Yeah.
cultivate that in people, so that you actually so you can, so it's not only that someone who's very safe in themselves can open up for these moments, but also someone who is, how can you teach people to open up for speech and
Yeah.
not only talk?
Yeah, I think that's a super important question, very helpful. And the first thing I want to say about it, it really brings out, I think, the most significant general Hegelian insight about education, is that it's not something that's contained in one region of life or one level of society. It's something that is happening from the beginning and until the end, and something that we're responsible for together throughout. So, like, and the trust example is a perfect one, right? Because even the first form in which this will be enabled or disabled is the family, where you have where you either you stand in need of learning to trust yourself and trust others, and which can only happen from inside the practice, that you actually, like, yes, there is someone to catch me when I fall, yes, there's someone to forgive me when I get something wrong, and but then the important thing is to see that, so there's one version of this in the family, and there's one version of this in the sort of form of public life as a school, but in all that's why we can't most generally isolate this question in just one region. But then, obviously, concretely in the classroom, then people will come with all sorts of different family experiences and so on. So and you can't fix all of that, but you can model a different way of being with one another, and being beholden to others, and the different ways of acknowledging both what you're responsible to and what you're responsible for, and yeah. And what's interesting about this as a philosophical topic is that in philosophy, we can both talk about this on a meta level and give a richer conceptual resources, a greater vocabulary, better distinctions to be able to see these issues in life. And then there's also, as in everything else, being able to actually do this in practice as a teacher. So, but we have to make this distinction, but also see how you can separate them, that they all are conjoined.
Yeah, basically, I don't know whether I can make this point really well now, but I was speaking before of this twofold love involved in education. Now, when you consider the situation in which your form of exposition is, displayed as insufficient, defective, and so on. Now the question, when you then are able to say, okay, let's slow down. We have not put this right. We must think again, and you thereby display. That's one aspect of it. Your love of understanding, because you place understanding higher than being superior, to the student, asserting your authority. Yeah. At the same, so there's love of understanding of placed above self-love, if you so want. Yeah. But there's furthermore, this love of understanding is the form in which a form of relation of one to another is made possible. Yeah, I'm just teaching Plato Politeia, which is about education. You know, it's the translation is the state. Yeah, but its central theme is education throughout, and they're not in those terms, but Plato makes a distinction between philosophy and sophistry. This is also sophistry, you know, the sophists. The sophists were in ancient Greece at the same time as Socrates, were teachers that offered the service of training the young, promising, wealthy men to a successful life in the polis, which required to perform with brilliance in both the Volksversammlung, the assembly, and the court. The courts were very, very large, partly coextensive with the assembly, that like 600 judges at the same time. So it was a very similar situation. So it's to speak with brilliance, eloquence, scathingly, you know, putting down the opponent, you know, emerging as the superior man. This was what the sophists offered to train you for. They also were famous for claiming that they could make the weak case strong and the strong case weak. Yeah, so they could turn things around. You know? So the sophist is interested in being victorious in debate, being the smarter one. Yeah. The philosopher is not interested in that at all. The philosopher, Socrates says, is most glad when he is shown to be wrong. And he's grateful to the one who shows him to be wrong. Why is he grateful? Well, because he who shows him to be wrong has relieved him of an evil, namely error and ignorance. Yeah, he's been relieved of that by that, so must be grateful. The sophist isn't like that. he tries to avoid this, but it may seem as though the sophist is interested in the relation of him to the other and who's the stronger, and that the philosopher is only interested in, you know, what the topic is. But what I want to emphasize is that that interest in what the topic is, the love of understanding, is itself a form of relation to the other. It enables a form of relation to the other, which is of a particular, which of a quite peculiar form, in that, namely, the interest in outdoing the other has become meaningless. Not that I have sort of enabled myself by moral discipline to let go of it, but that this interest in understanding makes it pointless. Makes it absolutely pointless to want to be smarter than the other. This is unintelligible aim all of the sudden. Yeah, you decide that, you know, you want to understand. And now you have made it possible for a relation among you and others that's completely free of this perennial desire. Yeah, you see? So this is this internal connection, you know, of understanding, intellectual activity, and so on, and a form of human relation, which is, I think, preeminently visible in education. Yeah.
I don't think it works. But
The microphone, you mean?
Yeah, the microphone she means. She means the microphone.
That's okay too. Yeah.
I wonder, you said before, like the difference between like speaking and talking.
Yeah.
I like misunderstood, but as I understood, it was like that speaking, if you have like a reason behind what you're saying, and talking is just if you're like yapping or bullshitting. Is that right?
Good. I'm glad you asked for that clarification, because it allows me to make it more precise. So, for those of you who didn't hear, she was asking for more about this distinction between speaking and talking. So the idea, first of all, we have to understand this as a dynamic, internal dynamic in speaking, of difference of degree. You know, you can speak or talk more or less. And the difference is not that when I'm falling into idle talk, that I don't have reasons, and that I have reasons when I'm speaking. It has to do with my relation to the reasons and the degree to which I'm able to take responsibility for the reasons, why I'm saying what I'm saying, and what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. So that's why, like, what counts as speech or talk in a given situation depends on the matter at hand. That was my point about when I say, I really don't understand. Can you please explain it to me? That can count as speech, because now you're really in touch with the situation at hand, or the matter at hand. You're speaking out of the current situation rather than an abstraction from it or fleeing from it. You're stepping into it rather than evading it. So what that means depends on what we're talking about, you know. But so it can mean when I'm lecturing about philosophy, and there's a lot of idle talk when people do history of philosophy. This is how you talk about it, and it sort of seems to make sense.
This is what Hegel says, I tell you.
This more and more covers over the sources. And then, like, all of a sudden you go to a lecture and someone is actually speaking about Aristotle. Because it opens up, like, so you can actually see the text and why it matters. So now you have someone speaking because they're in touch with the matter at hand. So that's in the register of philosophy. But my point is also this is a capacious distinction. So that this is that, like, when you're arguing with someone in an intimate situation, the moment can be tested when you're owning up to, like, I actually don't know how I feel, or I'm very confused. Now we're actually, like, making contact with what's at the issue rather than evading it. So I find we have to understand it as there's a phenomenon, there's a constitutive phenomenon, speaking, talking to one another, making sense of ourselves. And then internal to that, there is this normative distinction between speaking and talking that always matters to us. It matters that someone is speaking rather than talking. It can be hard to know what. So that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's right. It's a distinction that is in a way not possible to demarcate as well from outside your own understanding. There's no sign as well by which there's sometimes signs where you see it must be talk, but anyway, in general, it's a distinction drawn from within your own understanding. I can give an example. Like I lecture regularly on Aristotelian on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. I know if you have looked into this.
Oh, they do.
Terrific work. Yeah. Book 1, chapter 1 begins with a distinction, most fundamental distinction for any form of ethics, practical philosophy as such, between poiesis and praxis. That is to say, we already discussed this in a way, between a form of activity which aims at a product outside itself in which it comes to an end. It's like building a house. Yeah, this is an activity which has, as it were, its own proper end, and once the house is there, the house building is over. Yeah, and a form of activity that is for its own sake. Yeah, that is performed in such a way as to reproduce itself. Yeah, which is the general form of life. So he makes this distinction, and you can find this distinction. So when you type it into ChatGPT or whatever, you'll get an answer. And I tell you, the answer won't be so bad because it will just be extracted, from what's there on the web. There will be enough text, that have treated of this. Yeah. So I ask myself when I lecture about this, now how do I lecture about this? I want to lecture in such a way that I give something that is not more quickly got by typing into ChatGPT, explain to me the difference between poiesis and praxis. If I just did that, put that on the screen, okay, write it up. What am I for here? Yeah. So this brings out for me, as it were, specifically the question, what is my task? What is my task as a professor of philosophy? What's my task? And the task is not to be described by saying something different. As I just expounded the distinction, it's pretty clear. But the point is, my task is rather to be able to present it in such a way that the students think, oh my God, fuck, this is so what this distinction. Yeah, I mean, they see, that this becomes active for them in their own thought. It says how deep this distinction is, how thoroughly it sort of pervades every practical thought that you have, even without you noticing it. But how this distinction is, for example, takes apart utilitarianism in one stroke, for example, which is the dominant moral philosophy of our days. Yeah, but if you have comprehended this distinction, you cannot be utilitarian anymore. It's impossible. Yeah, but you see, like, I don't know how many % of moral philosophers in the Anglophone world are utilitarians, all of them. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But you see, so this is the activity of this distinction in the student's thought. And this is an experience also that you can have as a teacher. I mean, this is for me what I desire. I mean, what I try to I mean, it's also something I cannot control, but anyway, this is bring about, yeah, because it's the return, from the student of a form of activity by which this distinction now becomes alive, and is no longer something to be learned. Oh, I learned this, I got this. Oh, Aristotle makes this distinction. Yeah, oh, sure, yeah, but that this is now active in self-reflection about what is it to think about what to do. How is this thought about what to do organized? And now recognizing, oh my God, this is central. This is how I can move now in my own reflection. Now, this is the form of response that I seek, and which is not to be gleaned from just what is put on the screen. Yeah.
You had a finger on that, I think, and then we had 2 other questions. Yeah. Yeah, that's what a finger is. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think that it's a very good question. But the first thing to say about it is that these kinds of distinctions, when you make them, the point is not to provide an external criterion of how to apply it in each case. The first thing, and this is part of taking it slow, is to allow yourself to be struck by how expressive this distinction is, and how it really is something that you already care about, and that you actually care, that is an issue in all aspects of it. It really matters to you all the time, whether the person you're talking to is speaking or talking, or whether you're speaking or talking. It can illuminate so much. So first we have to sit with the expressive power of the distinction and learn what it is to see yourself in the world anew in light of that distinction. And that's going to capacitate you better, but not infallibly, to make the distinction in concrete cases. Oh, this is speech, this is talking. But that is part of the phenomenon. That has to be an issue between us. It cannot settle outside of us. It has to be settled between us. And that's why it's so difficult, and why it's so tempting to deny it or shut it down. But the point first is just to allow yourself to be struck by the distinction. And just as the Poesis practice distinction, that's in a way the first lesson of philosophy. Like, it's amazing to learn how to make distinctions and to learn to distinguish phenomena without separating them. That's the biggest conflation of all, to think that when you're distinguishing something, you're separating it. Now they're separate. No, they're distinguished, but now I also understand their relation. So they can be inseparable, even though they're distinguishable. And learning to do this is like going down into the minds and being able to turn on a flashlight, and all of a sudden you can see all these structures that were there. And first you have to be allowed...
You're getting out of the cave. Sorry. Sorry. You know the cave? You're inside.
Yeah.
You want to get out and see the sun. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think this is very central. There is an understandable desire to evade concepts that have that character. I mean, you can have concepts that are actually capable of kind of an external verification of their correct application. Like, this is like the DIN norm is called the Deutsche Industrienorm, the German the German industrial norm. It's like a set of standards, for certain things to satisfy in order to be placed in a certain category. It's called the DIN, Deutsche Industrienorm. That's a cool should
Sounds
memorize
ominous,
this. This sounds really great. Deutsche Industrienorm sounds really Deutsch. Anyway, so these are concepts, that you can, like a certain kind of screw, whatever, these are concepts whose correct application can be validated externally. There's no no one is put on the line when he assesses, now this doesn't satisfy the DIN norm, but they're and this is very secure. This is a form of safety, intellectual safety. When you operate with these kinds of concepts, and precisely you can rescind from any individual, involvement. But where the significance and the integrity of your own activity is thematized, if you and just very basically ask yourself, do I speak nonsense or do I speak sense? This is now a question that's not going to be answered by any D norm. But as you said, it's a question without which I cannot speak at all. Right? Or I mean, I can, yeah, but thereby sort of retreating from what I say. It's precisely by not admitting the possibility of that distinction that I am sure to fall into, pure Gerede. Yeah. So, but this is internal to these concepts, and they are all the concepts that are, that relate to what ultimately matters are of such a form. And it's clear that there must be, because you cannot allow anything from the outside to, as we're settled for yourself, those questions. Therefore, those concepts in which you as well articulate what's ultimately at stake and what you do and how you relate to others, all those concepts will be of such a form. Yeah, you can also say, I used some such concepts that concepts that I don't really like to name. That's why I said don't get sentimental, because there's certain danger, there's a danger of sentimentality, but also there would be also faults to avoid these ideas altogether. Although one must be careful, and there's trust and love, words must be treated with supreme care. Yeah, don't use them lightly ever. Yeah, don't use the name of God in vain. Yeah, so just the same principle applies here. Yeah, so these terms, these are of the same kind. These are of the same kind. They are not an object of like external validation and knowledge. Now, do you trust me? Can I have a criterion for that being so? No, I must trust in your trusting me. Yeah, there's no outside here. At the same time, this is of ultimate significance. And without this understanding, everything becomes shallow and mechanical. So, yeah.
Great. We've awakened many questions, which is wonderful. So, gentlemen here, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can just rephrase the question so because people might not have heard. Excellent question. So, what's your name? Sorry, Simon. Simon was asking about this distinction, two distinctions. One distinction that Sebastian makes in his text between acting in accord with the reason and acting in light of a reason. and what's at stake in that, and how that's related to what in my text I call spiritual freedom. That is to say, the ability to not just follow a norm, but to take responsibility for the validity of the norm and for that validity to be at issue. So that was the first part of this question.
Yeah.
And then concretely, then you were asking, how does that relate to these, what we have been calling the holy shit moments, or the I don't know, I can't tell moments, and what status those moments have vis-a-vis our capacity to act in light of reasons. Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking also about this kind of distinction between speaking and talking. When you're
Yeah.
not just talking, I'm not speaking, I'm just talking.
Yeah.
Which I guess kind of
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you already said this in response to the other question. It's not quite possible. I'm now repeating something you said. Very important. Always repeat. Repeat. It's very important. You must repeat again and again. Say the same thing. So I'm going to say the same thing again, what he said. Namely, that it's not possible to distinguish talking from speaking by saying speaking is in the consciousness of the reasons of what you say and talking is not. Because talking will usually be organized in such a way that one will be presented as a reason for the other. Yeah, this is the general form structure, of discourse. Talking will exhibit this discourse. And you said that this is not the distinction, but the way in which I am active in that articulation of what I say. Whether I am repeating Gerede, again, perfect participle, I repeat myself, repeating. Gerede, what's being said, said, or whether I am in the act of seeking comprehension through my own articulation. Yeah. So now this distinction, I think, is broadly shared among us. It's same idea. You need to find ways to articulate this, and there are different ways. It's ways of trying to bring out something. I think in common. And I think it is indeed intimately related to what we were speaking of when we said that there's a possibility of being, as it were, driven out of one's Gerede, by seeing that another says something which makes you aware that you have just been talking. Yeah? So, yeah. And this is that indeed is can be as what I'm going to try in a way to again articulate this, is that in your, as it were, thinking according to a certain understanding of what you're thinking, you are yourself as we're putting at stake, or as we're bringing forth, and thereby making an object of question and inquiry, that very understanding. That is what speaking is, yeah? And that is something that cannot itself be governed by like a further rule or principle. So if you act not just according to a rule, but from a rule or from your understanding of the rule, so that that understanding is itself sort of brought forth and, as it were, thematized in your very following it, then that following is precisely, so in that way, is self-reflective, and that as it were is the way in which you, as I was trying to say before, you as individual, yeah, not as an exemplar of a certain competence, but as individual, are present in what you say, because this is something that cannot be, as we're relegated to any generally articulated rule, norm, or principle, or whatever, because it resides precisely in the manner in which the principle is, as it were, at work in your action. Yeah. So there's an impossibility again of disappearing as an individual. You might want to do this. You might just, I'm just following the rules, So it's not me really. It's the rules that do it, It's just sometimes attractive.
I think this also brings out, an important aspect of this. I'm going to make this point, and I'm going to make one other point, but just this standing forth as an individual in the way that Sebastian was describing it, part of what good teaching can and ought to do is also to actually validate that capacity. And that's something that has to be done and cultivated, such that it's actually great. It's a sign of greatness to be able to take that kind of responsibility, even if it involves owning up to something you don't understand. So that's I think very, very important part of the formation of proper education, that we actually learn to something that can be very scary and a sign of insufficiency, that is actually being reevaluated as the very expression of the capacity to learn and to take responsibility and to understand. And that's something that we ought to desire for its own sake. And these moments of shortcoming are actually an essential part of that practice. And that's something that can either be denied or validated in the way we relate to one another, again, as always, both in the classroom, but also in all sorts of other living situations. But the general point I wanted to make, that your question brought out, is also another distinction that is very helpful to sit with, and that I think is very illuminating, is between what I'm calling the constitutive and the normative. And you make a distinction. Doesn't mean that they're separate, but so in this case we have a constitutive phenomenon of acting in light of reasons that is sort of constitutive of our life form in a certain sense.
Yep.
And the point is not that when we're doing it well, when we're speaking rather than talking, it's only then that we're acting in light of reasons, and otherwise we're just acting in accord with the reasons. Then we would have a problem of explaining the relation between these two. It's rather that there's one activity that can be well or badly done. And what's distinctive for us, and part of what the difficulty of our lives, is that minimally you're always not just acting in accord with the reasons. You're always minimally acting in light of reasons. You can try to pretend that you're just acting, just following the rules, but it's actually not possible. So this is a constitutive issue. And then the normative question has to do with how we're able to own up to or flee from that. And that is not just a moral question of the individual. That has to do with the kind of communities we form, whether that is enabled or disabled. So in relation to your question, I would say it's not like we become the kind of beings who act in light of reasons when we have this breakdown, or when we have a holy shit moment, or when we start speaking in the qualitative sense. It's rather that then we are more fully growing into or owning up to the kind of being who we are, and we're more capacitated to take responsibility for what we're already doing. But it's one activity, just as living is one activity, one life, one love. But it can be done well or poorly from the beginning until the end, and that's what's at stake. And these sorts of distinctions are distinctions within that activity. It marks a normative dynamic within the constitutive activity, and it expresses how this matters to us. And it matters to us not just that we do it, but that we do it well. So
yeah, I just picking up on one thing, and as we're relating it to something said before, and when I said this love of understanding it's at the same time a form of relation of one human being to another. It's a form of community. That's just something you emphasized again. This is a form of community, and that is why Plato says that we will get out of this mire only when the philosophers are going to be kings. Well, now what it means is only if our community is governed by that. Yeah, that's a form of communal life. Actually, to imagine a form of communal life, that's a radical character. Again, this is something that can be easily papered up. Oh, I'm going to teach politeia. It's just but this, how radical this is, how extreme this is. What Plato puts forth there is precisely to be found herein. A form of community that has as its general character, that form of responsibility, that form of individuality, that form of relation of one to another, and so on. But there was a question back in the back here. Yeah. Come on. Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, so yeah, I thought it was very interesting to, or it is very interesting to listen to your thoughts. And I was wondering if, because I recently studied Foucault and his ideas, and that like power and the relation between power and knowledge.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, because you spoke of understanding and to learn to understand. That's very important. And I was wondering if it's something that we need to understand, for example, taking responsibility, at the same time distracts the pure understanding, if you understand.
No,
Like, is it something that that we, for example, we need to take responsibility, or we learn to take responsibility, and we feel that it's important to do it. Still, it maybe distracts the free thinking, the free thought of developing own values and own opinions. And when we learn to understand, for example, when we learn to understand theories and how we build a society in school, it's sometimes at the same time, you know, I'm trying to, it's still, how do I explain it? It still don't make, like, it doesn't build our own understanding of things, like the free understanding. Do you understand what I mean? Or is
I
it
think I understand. I think I understand, but you can tell me if I'm just talking rather than speaking to your question. But I'll give it a try. So, I mean, I think you very helpfully and clearly bring out a set of concerns that are easily raised by the kinds of things that we've been saying, but that also provides an opportunity to clarify, to disambiguate, and make a couple of distinctions that I think are important. So, because it's very easy to think that being self-determining or having your own understanding is something in opposition to the general understanding, or like something idiosyncratic to you, that's what make it your own. And that's what freedom is then, freedom from the received understanding. Whereas the thought here is that that's the sort of inverted conception of freedom in a way, because the true freedom is the freedom to take responsibility for your understanding and for your actions, and that can be very compatible with that being a shared understanding, something you came up with on your own. But it also renders intelligible why you do have the capacity, and why we do have the capacity to also question and transform received understandings. But we're doing that not for the sake of having our own private understandings or our own private freedom, but for the sake of transforming the understanding and the norms that govern our life together. And I think one unfortunate consequence of the great influence of Foucault on these topics is that that sort of distinction tends to be elided, and along with that, a very fatal conflation of power and violence. And I think it's extremely important to distinguish power and violence. So there is a rational and free form of power. Someone can be very powerful, and I can be in the presence of their power, but not because they're coercing me or submitting me to violence, but because they're genuinely authoritative relative to what we care about here. Just as someone I love will have great power over me, but that's not a form of violence they're doing to me. It's because it is a genuine authority. So what we need is to have the right idea of power and authority, not to get rid of it, and to have a conception where, like, even that kind of non-violent power and authority is not something you have once and for all. It's not a property that you possess. It's something that you continue to have to sustain, because its life and its power only resides in the mutual relation. And I think we need to have that distinction clearly in view, such that our very understandable worries about prevalent forms of power and authority in our society and disabling norms and so on, that doesn't lead us to think that the solution is to get rid of power and authority and norms, but rather to like transform them and think carefully about what a genuinely free and rational form of these phenomena are. So, and I think your question is very helpful for bringing that into focus. And I'm always worried that, and I understand where people are coming from. We're like, oh yeah, there are all these norms that I want to break or transform. Yes, but not for the sake of no norms, but for the sake of having better norms that govern our lives.
I was just wondering if it sometimes like destroys your own ideas of, or like.
Right, but that would have to be. I mean, that would have to depend on what you mean by that in a particular situation. So your own idea then is, I would emphasize, is just when you have an idea, you want it to be socially shareable. You want it to be viable. You don't want it just to be your own idea. So you share it, and then that through that process you will discover whether it's a good or a bad idea. And it's going to be truly your own idea, not because only you have the idea or you came up with it, but because you can actually make it your own in practice and live your life in light of it in a good way. That's how it is your own and how you have a free relation to it. And I think this is so important to stress, because otherwise you get this very claustrophobic idea of freedom, that I can only get freedom by getting away from everyone else and having my own thing. But that's the wrong idea of your own. I understand where it's coming from, especially in our current society, why that would tempt one to think that. But there's another important work that philosophical distinction can make, is that like, no, that's actually not the freedom you're looking for. That's not the way ownership you're looking for. The ownership you're looking for is a viable way of being in relation to others and being able to both hold yourself responsible to them and being responsible for your life.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is very difficult theme, and we are not in a position now to discuss Foucault, of course, because that would require that we read together the text. But it's easy to fall into kind of skepticism in relation to this idea of a form of community that is governed by, I'll just say it again, the love of understanding. It's easy to fall into skepticism because the
There's so many bad versions of it.
The susceptibility to be itself again subordinated to vanity and self-love is in a certain way ineradicable. Yeah, you can see this. That philosophical conversation is the image of the form of freedom that you want. Nobody in a philosophical conversation, if he's in his right mind, wants to be original. That's really stupid to want to be original. I mean, this is not an aim. I don't know who said this. You probably know. Perhaps you know. The one who desires honor wants followers. The one who desires truth wants predecessors. So the desire for truth and understanding is not a desire to be original, but it's precisely as we're trying to bring out, and that makes it hard. It's precisely in your desire for understanding, you are required to be present, to be, as it were, exposed as an individual. You cannot hide. Yeah, when at stake is proper understanding in such a way that therein the very rules and principles through which you think are themselves put on the line, then you are, as individual, are at stake. And this is the form of, as it were, individuality, which is not originality or being like, that's mine. It's my opinion. It's like, I want this. This is my class. This is my idea. No, this is not idea. As you said, idea is not, this is mine. this is intellectual property. It's, of course, we need this kind of law, but this is really extraneous to thought and understanding. Understanding is community as such, but precisely therein, it requires that I be present as an individual, and that's what we've been trying to belabor. And it's very hard to get clear that this individuality is precisely not a form of, drawing a line around me, and that's
And just an important footnote on that is that when we say individual or self-determining, that should never be conflated with independent. Autonomous self-determining is not being independent. It's a certain way of being independence and in relation and being answerable. And then we get a very different model of what it is to come into your own as an individual, not by separating yourself from the relation, but being able to stand in genuine relations. So that's sort of like two different models.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably rather straightforward to see that the desire to have your own opinion is really vanity, is really self-love. For what else would make you want to have your own opinion? I mean, what you want is understand. You want to, think the truth and know the truth. That's got nothing to do with what's mine as distinct from you. It's precisely, when I was speaking about this, the distinction between the sophist and the philosopher. The sophist wants to outdo the other. He's always, that's I, that's you. Now I'm gonna, yeah. But it's understanding which gets rid of this. Wanting my own opinion is. Oh, sorry.
Charitably, what one could also mean by that, so that Sebastian was going the wrong way of hearing it, but I think also what often people mean by having your own opinion is that I want to understand for myself why this is true.
Right, exactly. So I don't want Gerede.
And exactly.
I don't want
there's
to speak others.
There's an important truth. There's a reason people speak this way, and then there's a way of misunderstanding what is being said. But the truth content of the claim that I want to have my own opinions is that, like, I don't just want to take this on authority. I want to be able to recognize the authority, to feel the power of the truth, and understand why, and be in possession of that why. And that's so. And I think that's what people really are after when they say that, rather than the vanity.
But we've been speaking right, exactly. We've been working on as we're bringing out the way in which I, as individual, am present in my understanding.
And you need to be present. It matters that you are present as an individual.
Right. And but one way to see that it's got nothing to do with being original and the opinion being mine is that, and we have also been emphasizing this, so we can remember that therein I am exposed to the other. We've been speaking about these moments where precisely in, bringing forth as we're presenting, articulating my understanding so as for it to be received by another, I'm therein exposed to something that is not under my control, but of irreducible significance to me. Namely, the other's response. They say, well, makes no sense. Then I can say, well, makes no sense to you, but it's my opinion. That would not be speaking to the other. Yeah, so it's I am present as individual precisely and being open to the other. Open. It's a form of being exposed to the other, in which I'm individual, not a way in which I'm sort of separated, cut off, and guarding what's mine.
Great. You've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah.
Okay, does this work? Yeah. I have a question about when you were talking about or speaking about Heidegger and the importance of speaking. And as I interpret it, by speaking, you're putting your thoughts and your words at risk of being questioned as a teacher. But how does that work for like the student, basically? How do you implement that into teaching?
Yeah, absolutely, very helpful. So the first thing to say is that the putting yourself at risk is one aspect of speaking. It's not. It's one aspect. It's not the whole thing. It just sort of follows from speaking in such a way that now it can actually be revealed what you understand and don't understand.
Yeah.
You're showing yourself in that way. So then the risk flows out of that, but it's not just the risk, but it's an essential element, irreducible element of it. And that's also part of what explains why the temptation to just talk. So remind me of the connection you made.
So,
I don't remember. Yes, I've lost
yeah.
my thread.
How do you implement that part, that risk?
Yeah,
What I mean,
exactly. Great. So this allows me to repeat, if I may, since that's can be a virtue. Two examples. I mean, on both the teacher and the student side, I think that are important. Is that like, first of all, by doing that as a teacher, you model that sort of relation to the object of understanding. That sort of desire to understand, trumping. My own need to protect myself, because what really matters here is this shared object of understanding. We want to understand, we desire to understand, and you display in practice a way of owning that desire that we already share in such a way that, like, yeah, that is sort of vulnerable and difficult, but it's, you can do it, and either through doing it we can get somewhere new, we can advance, we can open up, and I think that in itself models a way of being in relation to the object of understanding. That itself is a significant lesson and a significant form of teaching. But then on the student side, the simple example I gave was just, and I know this is something that Niklas does a lot and has thought a lot about, is precisely to encourage what you might think is a stupid question, right? I don't want to ask this because then it's revealed that I don't really get it. Which is very different than revealing that you haven't done the reading. You might have done the reading, but you genuinely don't understand. And you will now speak by speaking to that issue. And rather than just bullshit about the text or like pretend that you understand. And I think like by validating those moments, not just instrumentally, but validating them as themselves expressions of why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. And this is great. It's great in itself, not just as a means to understand. It's great that you did this, because that itself is a virtue. And I think just from that simple premise, then you generate a very different mood in the classroom and a very different way of, besides practically by seeing we can relate to one another this way. It doesn't have to be a top-down structure, but there are still relations of authority. There are still questions of right and wrong that really matter. So something like that.
And when we subject ourselves together to the discipline required of what we seek to understand. So it's not a matter of everybody saying what comes into her mind, and that's now we have a free discussion. No, it's the strictest discipline possible. But at the same time, this is, I also think, absolutely essential. It's also something Wittgenstein is known to have said in a seminar. You know, when someone said, "Well, I don't know, I think it's a stupid question." Wittgenstein's reporters say this question. We need this question. We need this stupid question. Yeah, because in this form of, you come out with a form of words which you think is stupid and probably reveals that it didn't get it. And Wittgenstein says we need this form of words. We together need this form of words because it will require of us to be able to say it in such a way that this question disappears or not. Yeah, but we need it. It's precisely the stupid question that we need. We don't need a sophisticated question. No, we need this element. So this is something that I think is it goes with being slow, and not being smart. Philosophy is not about being smart, about being quick. No, it's about asking the stupid question. Yeah.
And there's just a footnote to that. There's a third distinction from being in time that I think is very helpful here, and that will illuminate and draw together a lot of the things we've been talking about. So Heidegger has this term for our constitutive way of being in relation to one another, which he calls Fürsorge. That's one modality of care, caring about other persons in the world and the way you stand in relation to them. And this is something that, in one sense, is constitutive. You have no option but to care about your relation to other people and you're standing in relation to them. But like all such activities, it has a whole spectrum from the inauthentic to the authentic, as it were, from the owned to the unowned. And he has some very striking examples that speak directly to the pedagogical situation, because he says, like, well, in this way of being, in this activity of Fürsorge that we're always involved in, for better or for worse, you can, in and through that activity, you can relate to the other by leaping in and dominating, taking over their care for them. Like, instead of helping my daughter with the homework, I'm just going to do it. I'm much faster. I take it over and I give it back to you. And thereby you take. How do you say? The problem with that is you take away the other's care from them. The other extreme is, instead of leaping in and dominating, blocking the view, taking over, you leap forth and liberate. You open up a space of possibilities. And the point of that, he says, is so as to give the other's care back to them. And this is exactly what we've been talking about. Because what is that care? That is your Selbstsorge. That is your concern with the kind of person you are and the kind of life you're leading in and through Fürsorge, in and through your relations to others. And that opening up a way in which you can actually learn to cultivate that care that is constitutive, but it's being given back to you in a new form through the pedagogical situation, because now you actually see ways in which you can own rather than disown that. You can face up to it rather than flee from it. And that would be the basic sort of grammar of learning virtue, I take it. Yeah.
Here was a question.
You talked a lot about taking responsibility for what you.
I think it works, actually.
What you're saying and your actions. And my question is, how do we understand our action as our own? And it may sound stupid, because everything I do, everything I say is my own, but I don't think we see it that way. Always when we act, if someone said, that thing you did yesterday was mean, I can be like, oh, it wasn't me, I was tired that day, or something like that. Or
excuse me, can you say, why would you say it wasn't me? What kind of?
Because it doesn't resonate with how I see myself. And so sometimes when people say something that doesn't feel like me, I will not take responsibility for those actions. How can we as individuals understand actions like that as our own? How can we always understand that everything we do is our own? That's my question.
Well, I don't know whether I have, I'm perfectly onto the kind of situation that you have in view, but it seems to me that the question how I respond to the other in this case depends on whether or not I shield myself from the demand of the other. I think the response by saying, "Oh, well, this wasn't me. I saw it differently," or so, and well, it may have come across in this way to you, but you know, that's not what I did in my understanding of it. That's in a way, I think. I don't know, limiting the other to my drawing limits around the other, basically, to what he or she can approach me with. And I think there is internal to the ethical relation to the other human being, there's a kind of form of infinity of the other, which at the same time has this effect of, exploding my responsibility. And I think when you are in a relationship that really matters to you, where you allow the other to be really present for you, that will be the case where you may be struck down by the recognition that you did something not knowing what you did, but you're being fully responsible for its evil character, even though you don't know. And this is I think sort of the form of depth to which a relation to the other human being is, of which the relation to the other human being is capable. But of course, there is the possibility, as always, to wreck the wall around you and say, no, you can touch me only in this area. And what doesn't flow through this hole that I made out doesn't touch me. So I say, well, that's got nothing to do with me. That's your business. Yeah? That's always possible. It's always possible. But what is remarkable is that's again a distinction of the form we've been discussing, where there's no outside criterion. It's sort of a question of that is internal to your understanding and being yourself. But that distinction, of either allowing yourself to be exposed to the other or shielding yourself from the other, that distinction is internal.
Can I add to my question then?
Sure, please.
Because
yes.
Then I wonder how you give authority to everyone to question you, and how do you not take that questioning too far? Because even though I always should, if someone said, yeah, I think your action led to this and that, I should always think about that. But not always we should let that.
Good.
How I should do the action the next day, because someone may not have known the situation. So how do I keep this balance between letting people recognize me as someone and not making it always affect me in all ways?
Okay.
I think that's a very, very important follow-up, I think, and I think it helps to stave off, I think, what would be the wrong way of hearing what Sebastian was saying, because it would be if you just say, okay, I'm not going to impose anything on the other. Whatever you say, you're right. I'm always wrong. Not only is that completely unviable, it's actually another way of protecting yourself. Because now I'm actually invulnerable because I've already accepted everything you bring to bear on me.
Absolutely.
So this has to be. That's why the power and the issue is not in you or in me; it's between us. So the point is, on the one hand, when you say, you can't simply just say, or when you do, it's in bad faith, that, oh, that's not how I meant it, hence there's no issue. But it would be equally wrong to say, just because this other person has this interpretation, that's just true because you're the other and I'm subjecting myself to you. That's another way of not being in relation.
Absolutely.
And it's a passive way of trying to achieve invulnerability. Because now I have no commitments of my own, and I just receive everything you impose on me. There's no activity of resistance. So now I'm trying to be invulnerable that way. So
that's actually a form of irresponsibility.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the point is not to exceed all authority to the other, nor arrogate it all to yourself, but to recognize precisely the constitutive dynamic between us. And that will always be difficult in practice. And where philosophy is necessary but not sufficient is giving us better distinctions, better way of making sense of ourselves and what's at stake in those practices, and actually being able to see the dynamic and not describe it in misleading terms. Because when you do, that's not just a theoretical mistake, that has practical consequences of closing off what's possible and not. So this sort of philosophical work of distinction will not give you the formula for how to balance in every situation, but it will give you distinctions that will make the situation more determinate and more readily seen.
It's magnificent. Our time is unfortunately up. But this is a way of living a life
Indeed.
So in this way, understanding and thinking about what is said and what says is a way of breathing, eating, as a rational being. So we have to thank you for this meal.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we hope to see you again.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah. And then we have a little symbolic gesture. Monsieur.
Okay.
Both sweet and nourishing. Thank
Yes.
you.
The bag is included. Yeah, so this. Yeah, the bag is for this. Yeah. Then you get a blue bag. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, very much.